I'm Alison Hope Weiner, and welcome to another episode of Media Mayhem. Today's guest is Emmy Award-winning producer and writer Terence Winter. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. The reason I decided and asked Terry to be with us today is because the Emmys are on Sunday, and I wanted everybody to get a chance to hear from the brilliant writer of Boardwalk Empire, also the brilliant writer from The Sopranos, and I wanted to welcome Terry to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Terry, so I just wanted to say Boardwalk Empire is up for 12 Emmys on Sunday. And you're going up against some good competition, some other good shows. But I wondered, was there any particular scene from last year in terms of the writing that you really wanted to be recognized when you were submitting things to the Academy? I mean, I know the way it works is you have to pick out the different episodes that you thought were your best episodes from last year. So what did you pick, and what was your favorite? I shouldn't say scene, but episode, about each one. I'm just asking you to pick your favorite child.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Each writer submits one episode that they've written for Emmy consideration. That's based on the rules. The episode that I'm most proud of is actually one that I didn't write myself. It was our 11th episode. Called Under God's Power She Flourishes, and that's the episode where Jimmy and his mother actually do the act, the incest episode. I thought that was just so powerful, so strong, written by Howard Corder, who's one of our exec producers on the show, and it was just so powerful and just so well written and beautiful and beautifully acted and directed by Alan Coulter. And for me, that really the show just came full circle. I mean, that was such a big payoff to a storyline we had set up from the very beginning. I was also fond of the finale, which I wrote and Tim Van Patten directed. Again, another huge payoff to something that was set up all the way back in the pilot. Jimmy telling Nucky, "You can't be half a gangster." Well, here it comes full circle, and Nucky crosses that line by killing the very guy who gave him that advice. Those are two episodes I was very proud of. I mean, really proud of the whole season, honestly.
I'm sure. I just wondered if because you have to pick out some things that you think were your kind of your best work for the show. And I just wondered if there were certain things, and I know that the incest episode was very controversial. Is that something that you had mapped out, and did you consider that maybe it was going too far?
In the very beginning of the series, we weren't sure if it actually ever went as far as actual incest. I knew that it was an extremely inappropriate relationship. That was clear right up front, and that was almost
so you hadn't decided when you started writing you were going to go?
Not that it went that far. I knew a lot of inappropriate stuff had gone on over the years. Of course, Jillian was only 13 when she gave birth to Jimmy. He was raised in the backs of cabarets and very inappropriate circumstances. I'm sure I'd seen his mother naked a million times. Probably lost his virginity to a showgirl or something like that along the way. So it was the whole relationship, even from the very first time you see these two together. If you remember in the second episode, Jimmy goes to see her and she's rehearsing a show and she comes and runs and jumps into his arms. She's almost naked. They kiss, and then midway through the scene, he calls her Ma. And it's sort of this needle off the record moment where you go, did he just say Ma? And she's a kid, she's basically, 10 years older than him. In real life, I think not even. So it was again, we knew it was very inappropriate. As the plotting of the series progressed, we knew there was some pivotal event that caused him to join the army at when World War I was raging and leave Angela, who was pregnant with their baby, and we were, what could that be? And it became apparent that was the thing that made him leave and join the army, probably hoping that he wouldn't come back. And of course he did, and he came back.
So they got to get away from Mom.
Yeah, exactly. So
Mom wants to sleep with me.
I know, isn't that? It sucks when that happens, but
a lot of people run away for that reason.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: you mentioned Van Patten directing. Are there a lot of people working on your show right now who you work with on The Sopranos? And when you started up, were you trying to? In what ways were you trying to create the similar milieu of working on The Sopranos, and in what ways did you want it to be different and bring in different kinds of people to work with you?
There are a lot of people working on our crew from The Sopranos. First and foremost is Tim Van Patten. He was the first phone call I made when I realized we had a series, and he came on as an exec producer and essentially my creative partner in this endeavor. We've used Alan Coulter as a director, as a name people would recognize from The Sopranos. Again, a lot of crew people. The Sopranos set and the Sopranos experience was something that I will compare everything I ever do back to. It was a golden time for me. creatively, in my career, the friendships I made. That was such a fun set. I mean, you know, and Matt will tell you, Matt Weiner, your brother and my friend and colleague on Sopranos, we just laughed, you know, from morning till night. Great set, really fun, friendly set. And we really, by design, tried to recreate that. You know, it's hard enough to do this job when it's, you know, when it's going well. You really want it to be fun and friendly, and we just really try to keep a real.
But
fun
it seems
set.
I've read things also, though, in terms of the casting and the way you were putting the show together, that you wanted to be sure that somebody like Steve Buscemi doesn't look like Jim Gandolfini, that you wanted to break away from and make sure that it was a different show,
right?
Obviously.
Sure.
But I wonder in what ways did you try to make sure that it would be different and that it wouldn't, I mean, everything necessarily gets compared to The Sopranos because it was such a wonderful
particularly this,
show.
it's a gangster show set in New Jersey. I mean, so coming right out, you know, following The Sopranos with another gangster show was already asking
I wondered,
for trouble.
I wondered.
But it was too good to pass up. I mean, here I had this opportunity to work with Martin Scorsese. I've got this book. The book really, the whole history of the show is they had given me the book Boardwalk Empire, which is really a history book about Atlantic City. And they said, just read the book and see if you think there's a show in there. And I zeroed in on a chapter about this guy, Nucky Johnson, who we fictionalized as Nucky Thompson, and it was about the Prohibition era. And I think, wow, this is great. I mean, not since The Untouchables in 1960 has this era been explored on TV. You know, what a golden opportunity to go. This is sort of the flip side of The Sopranos in a way. And one of the first things Tony ever said on the show was, I feel like I came in at the end of something. And this was the beginning of that something. This was the origins of organized crime. Prohibition was really the single event that made organized crime possible. So for me,
it's like a prequel in a sense.
Yeah, in a way. This is sort of the beginning. And you know, 1920. I mean, it's 90 years ago. I mean, it looks like a different world. So if you know what, this will feel. There will be certain similarities. Obviously, the gangsters and gangster behavior through the millennia has not changed, but the look and feel, you know, will be quite different. So,
and I wondered when you put on Bobby Cannavale this season,
sure.
Were you concerned now you're introducing an Italian element into your organized crime world? But again, is that just this is the tip of the iceberg, and this is the way these guys started to gel and the different factions started to come about? Is that
it was real? You know, I mean, certainly Lucky Luciano was Italian, and Joe Mazzaria. I mean, but there were, you know, one thing, you know, people are alternately happy and surprised about is that we have Jewish gangsters on the show.
Yay!
Yeah, no, I cannot tell you how many people go, yeah, finally we have a show with our gangsters. The people are very proud. The Jews assimilated out of organized crime so quickly that younger Jews today don't realize there was a time, and you know, when they think about it, they go, oh yeah, I guess Murder Incorporated, of course, you know, Bugsy Siegel.
Wouldn't that be like
but
this
it's not,
young Jew, they are unaware of like the origins of the movie business?
Yeah, exactly, the same thing, you know. Yeah. So, but I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me and say, oh, I'm so thrilled to see Arnold Rothstein depicted on film, or a young Meyer Lansky and things like that. So it's really sort of an equal opportunity. I bring the cultures together, which is
it is a melting pot of organized crime.
There's Irish,
which is very different.
Dean O'Banion we introduced this season in Chicago, and certainly the African American community in Atlantic City, and they all had their own. You know, the thing that made Luciano a visionary is that he was willing to work and very friendly with Meyer Lansky, and you know, he just wanted the strongest possible team, and he didn't care. Wasn't really divided along ethnic lines.
It's very American.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But you want the best gangster for
Absolutely.
the job. That's what we always say.
That's give me your tired and poor gangsters.
Well, I wanted to ask you, this is one last Soprano question, and we were just chatting about this briefly before the show started. But when I watch your show and also when I watch Matt's show, there are certain elements that are similar, and I only can conclude either that you learned those from David Chase, or that that's something that you were hired, that David hired you because he was of a similar mind. And that is, there's a certain quiet on your show where you don't know what people are thinking. And we were just chatting about that, where Margaret is watching the woman aviatrix fly over in the opening episode for this season, and you don't have her speaking. I mean, she's just watching, and there's a lot of that in your of glances towards each other. You know, my mom said, you know, critical glances. You know, that speak so much, but without anybody speaking. And I wondered, you know, it's something that other series have tried to imitate, but in your show, in Boardwalk Empire, there's a lot that's left unsaid. There are a lot of things that don't come to, it doesn't translate a certain look or a character's internal thoughts that you kind of are guessing and don't translate into action. Is that something that you purposely carried over from The Sopranos, or is that something that you actually thought of, were sort of committed to before you came to The Sopranos? Is that something you guys learned when you were there?
I can't speak for Matt, of course. Yeah, why not though? I can do it.
Go ahead.
No, I can't.
I give you permission.
Great. I think Matt would agree.
Of course. You know how agreeable he is.
Yes. I learned so much from David. I mean, up until the time I worked on The Sopranos, I'd only written on network TV. So I had to unlearn a lot of the stuff I learned there. A lot of it was spoon-feeding information to the audience, overwriting in a sense, over-explaining, writing to a joke, creating a situation so I would arrive at a punchline. What David taught me was let the humor come naturally. These people are absurd to begin with. The humor will be there. Just trust that if you put Tony Sirico, who plays Paulie Walnuts, in a room with Michael Imperial, who plays Christopher, comedy will ensue whatever they're doing. Again, not answering questions. Let people draw their own conclusions, and that's something it took me a while to get the hang of in writing The Sopranos. But after that, for me as an audience member, it's so much more satisfying. It's okay that you finish a show and walk away and think, and ask your wife or husband or a friend, what was it? What do you think he meant by that? Or why? Or how about this? Wait till next week and that question might be answered for you. Or
but it might not.
And that's fine too.
So it's purposeful.
Yeah, a little mystery. Yeah, it's fine.
It's purposeful when you're doing the writing. And you actually said to me that there are audience members that come up to you. I mean, they come up to you in the street or even your friends and ask you, like, why did you do that? And certainly, why did you make this decision, or why is she looking like that, or why didn't she talk to him?
Right.
And you get some heat for it. And is that something that's like part of now your writing? I mean, that's something you want to happen?
I don't purposely set out to deny people information, but again, I think people are so programmed to have everything wrapped up in a neat bow and say, here, this is the answer. We caught the murderer. It all worked out fine. It drives people crazy, when they don't get what they want sometimes, and a lot of people stamp their feet. I mean, the internet is full of people who are just clamoring for closure or wish fulfillment, and
or anger.
It's just not it's not a romantic comedy, and it's not necessarily all going to work out in the end, or how you want it to, or how you expect. But hopefully, it's satisfying and entertaining. And
it's just different. I mean, I think the other shows, it's amazing to me that even after The Sopranos, where everybody trying to copy it, that those shows get tied up in a neat little bow, and that I mean, it's more like a book, like where you don't quite know somebody's motivation. You may finish the book and go, what happened to her? Not like what was she really thinking? I mean, where everything isn't totally answered by a book. So, and I don't even think, and that's just something that makes you rethink what you just saw. And I find that aren't you surprised that more people haven't captured that essence in terms of imitation of what you write, other shows on television? Because they seem to they'll drop a story, a plot line, but they don't get that's not what it is.
Right. I don't know. I mean, so much of it is still network TV driven, and I know there might be people who want to do that and aren't allowed to. I mean,
that's what I wondered.
Television will just not allow you to not give information. There are people, they live in fear of people out there not understanding everything or being unsettled. And again, it's like if you make somebody feel something they don't want to feel, and you're trying to sell soap at the same time, those are the two things that networks cannot abide by. So we caught the murderer, it all worked out, it's all going to be fine. I think David once said, the function of network TV is to reassure you that everything's fine and you should buy things. And that's really it. It's all great. Whatever you think you're right, and buy this product. And we don't really have to worry about that so much. So, I think a lot of the early attempts to replicate what The Sopranos were misguided because they thought what The Sopranos was nudity, violence, and foul language, when in fact it was actually what made it different was the storytelling. Exactly what we're talking about. Letting stories breathe, don't answer every question, let the audience draw its own conclusions. It's okay. Someone once said that art asks questions, it doesn't give answers, and I think that was certainly something that David was aspiring to.
I mean, I think it's something that I see when I'm watching your show, and certainly in the first episode of the season, there has been a bit of controversy about your tendency to kill off main characters.
I have not heard anything about this. That's interesting. Really?
I'm afraid. I guess you aren't reading angry comments on your on the Boardwalk Empire page, but
yes.
But basically, the death of Jimmy, the murder of Jimmy, played by Michael Pitt, and it made me think when everybody started complaining, like, how could he have killed off this, this main character like this. How could you have killed off the main character? Of what you did to Adriana in The Sopranos, in I guess in the scene where in long-term parking, the episode that was called long-term parking. I will refresh your memory, but the FBI confronts Adriana, threatens her with 25 years in prison. Anyway, they find out that the mob finds out that she's talking to the FBI, and she's driven into the woods by Silvio, and then she is desperately trying to crawl away on the forest floor, and Silvio pulls out a pistol and kills her. So I'm wondering, what is the thought process that goes into killing off a main character? But let's just start with Jimmy. I mean, why kill him off, and who do you think, is he being replaced this season by? I mean, who would be fulfill that place in the narrative?
Right. In terms of the decision to kill Jimmy, that was something I knew from the pilot on. I knew that at one point Jimmy would be killed by Nucky. The whole payoff to the line, you can't be half a gangster anymore. Eventually Nucky was going to cross that line and become fully a gangster, and he would do it by killing the guy.
Did Jimmy know he was going to die? The guy that played Jimmy?
He did at some point. Early on in the season Michael started coming into my office and saying, this is really heading in a direction. And I wasn't crystal clear that it was going to happen at the end of season 2, in the beginning of season 2, as we were plotting it out. As the season progressed and we started plotting it out, it became apparent to me that it really needed to happen at the end. And it was all based on the idea that if I'm trying to depict reality in this world, there is no other conclusion than this guy gets it and he gets killed by Nucky. Anything less would have felt like a network TV, out. He's our main character. People love him. It just would have felt phony to me. And it would drive me as a viewer insane. Okay, all year long he goes against the king. He has this failed coup attempt, and now all's forgiven in the end. It's like, don't do that again. And just so we can keep this character alive. It would have made my life a lot easier as a writer. It would have made our writing staff's life a lot easier. But as I've said to them, let's make it more challenging for us, not easier. And more importantly, I want to be real here. And if it means, this is the corner.
You wouldn't have let him live, is what you're saying.
Absolutely not. Yeah, and maybe he should have killed his brother instead and let Jimmy live. But that's not how it played out. In terms of replacing him.
Yeah, but what do? You get that big hole then, like you're saying. You make a problem for all the writers of finding somebody that everybody's invested time in and energy. And so how do you? And you did this over and over again in The Sopranos. How does it work? How do you do it?
Well, you come back, and one of the first things we did is try to decide, all right, where do we come back? Do we come back the next morning, or And I said, well, you know what? I know what happened the next morning. Nucky came home. He found out that Margaret gave his land away. They had a huge fight, big knockdown, drag-out fight. People found out that Jimmy Darmody was missing. Nucky got blamed. It's sort of like, okay, I'm past all that. That's boring to me because I already know it. I said, what if we jump ahead 14 months? Where are they now? And then there's crickets in the writer's room. I said, great. It could be anything. I don't know where Nucky is. Well, physically, literally, people could be in different places. Psychologically, they're in different places. And that, to me, was 100 times more interesting. All the stuff that happened after Nucky killed Jimmy and Margaret gave the land away, we will learn by inference as the series goes on. Oh, okay. And certainly by the end of the premiere episode, you realize that Nucky and Margaret aren't really living together. They're just putting on this public face. And, okay, he's still really pissed about that, and they're just really out, to show people that they're a couple, but they're really not. As the season progresses, we'll learn more about Nucky's psychological state, in terms of killing Jimmy, and again, and then we're having new stories. In terms of replacing the character, it's sort of like being, I guess I made the analogy of it's being a magician. At one point as an entertainer, we're directing our attention here, and you look at there, and then suddenly there's something over there, and you go, oh, okay, and you're focused on that. Assuming that what you're watching over here is entertaining, you're not back on what happened in season 2. So it's not so much replacing the character with a new character that's just like him or serves the same function. Right. It's telling different stories. It's a new era in Nucky's world. But you have to get a story that somebody's going to have a character to focus on. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying that you're replacing that, but you're replacing that attention. Yeah. I mean, that hole, and you have to put something new. Well, the whole, maybe the thing that Jimmy represented certainly in the second season was conflict for Nucky. And drama, the essence of drama is conflict.
So is that how you do
and certainly, yeah, I mean, in terms of a nemesis, Nucky's got Jip Rossetti. this year, and several other problems that will become evident as the season progresses. But there's certainly a big conflict for Nucky in season 3, and it's certainly Bobby Cannavale is filling those shoes.
Right. I mean, I thought that's a great choice. I heard as we were sitting here and we were chatting about the publicity and talking about the show, that you said that you're facing a difficult problem of people watching the show at different times. I guess this is a new thing for a lot of people that are writing, and how much you could say, because your job is to get out there, I mean, to some extent, and publicize your show and talk to people about it, or actors on the show have to go out and publicize it. So how do you work with this kind of screwed up schedule where people can have it on demand? They're watching the whole season, I mean, suddenly it gets more and more popular, and that certainly has happened with Mad Men, where they'll discover it and they'll go backwards, and it's happening, and it happens with all shows these days that are great. Well, all 3 of them. No. It's my personal opinion. But so what do you do in terms of publicizing, and how do you get around that without people saying you're ruining it for me, you talk too much about that? Because, I mean, as a writer, if I was writing about you and doing a profile and including the show, I wouldn't care. I would write about it. If it hadn't aired yet, I would respect that.
Right.
But once it's aired, those are the old rules. Are there new rules?
I think that's all you can do. I mean, if it hasn't aired yet, try to keep it secret. Some journalists don't abide by that, and they get advanced screeners and they leak things out. And which, as an audience member, it really pisses me off. That's a true spoiler.
Now, this is a show about the media. Let me just stop you. What do you do to those journalists that aren't abiding by the rules and are screwing up the rollout and maybe costing you viewers?
I've written a few emails or asked the people who handle that at HBO to say, can you please remind this person not to give away story points? It's it's hard to keep track of it. There's so much information out there. The whole idea of what constitutes a spoiler. People, Jimmy Darmody, and I'm about to spoil this for people now. Our character Jimmy gets killed at the end of the 2nd season finale. It was on TV a year ago. I mean, I can't help you if you consider that a spoiler. I'm sorry. It's been out there and written about. Thousands and thousands of articles have appeared. So for me, again, I've said that it's Darth Vader being Luke's father is not a spoiler anymore. It's a certain amount of time.
I think it's just too bad, because if you really want to talk to you about who is, if I'm going to talk to you about who Bobby Cannavale's character is, I mean, you're going to tell me what has been out there already, not what's coming, just that you should pay attention to, these are his character traits. And I'm going to ask you that question, but it's too bad. I mean, how can you even not talk about, he just was on television and people want to know what you're planning or what you're thinking. There's so much analysis too. I mean, because of the internet, because there's so much blog space that has to be filled up with words. I mean, the constant recapping of every episode every week is sort of like, and they review episodes, and it's like reviewing chapters of a novel. And they'll make these, they come to these conclusions about a storyline or anything when it's the 3rd episode into the season. And you say, well, watch the whole thing and see where it's going. And it's like, and there's just also the process too. I do a lot of interviews and talk about the craft and my thought process behind it. And in some ways I feel there's too much information, and maybe there should be a little more mystery about how this all is thought up. Because I think you don't want to really be in the sausage factory. You just want to eat the sausage. That was good, and sometimes people are disappointed. They look for bigger, deeper meanings in things or greater themes, and there are many of them. But sometimes things are coincidences, and people we have to talk about the dog in the last episode, where the Cannavale character hands the dog to Margaret, and everybody was just obsessed with it. And I thought the dog was going to get it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that's one of the cardinal rules of TV: do not hurt animals. Not that I would seek out to do that anyway, but it's funny.
But it blew up.
You can have people, kill 90 people on TV. They hurt an animal. That's it. Well, it's funny. At the end of the party scene, Bobby Cannavale's character is leaving, and he's in a little annoyed, and he grabs the dog and runs upstairs. In post-production, we added in a sound effect of the little dog yelping. And the dog did not yelp. Bobby didn't hurt the dog. He just took the dog. But people freaked out. It's like, he hurt the dog. And it's like, no, that was a sound effect. He didn't really hurt the dog. But that got so much attention of all those millions of dog lovers out there who were really concerned that Bobby was going to hurt that dog. And
But you know why that is? It's because of what we were just talking about, that silence of you not explaining every single thing.
Sure.
Sometimes when it's something inconsequential, you read too much into it. and that happens. Like if your show isn't telling you every single thing, you're going to play that game.
Sure.
And so that's why when somebody gets you at the table, you go, "What about this? What about that?"
Absolutely, yeah. And certainly Bobby's character is a hair trigger psychopath. So you've already seen him kill a man in cold blood for what was not even really an insult. So God knows what he might do. You know, the guy could do anything at any time. So
he's very explosive, and I thought it's so. And why did you choose Bobby? You said that you had seen him before. What role was it that drew you to choose him
I've been aware of Bobby, for years as an actor, but I saw him in a play called Motherfucker with a Hat, and he's just so riveting and so explosive and so commanding. And he was one of the few Italian-American actors that we didn't get to work with on The Sopranos. When I met him, I said, how did you miss being on the show? Yeah, exactly. But we laughed about it, and I said, well, this is great. I mean, what a great opportunity to work with him now. And he was just great. I mean, he's got this incredible menace and a natural comedic ability that just comes across, and he just handles everything just right on that edge of you just don't know what he's going to do. He's just got that natural unpredictability and knows how to play that, and it's great. It's exactly what the character calls for, and he's a completely different energy than anybody else we've had on the show thus far. And,
he is. I mean, just because he's so explosive. I mean, that kind of it's like simmering and so obvious, and you don't know who he's going to kill at any moment. That's why everybody thought the dog was going to get it.
Right.
Or I thought the
dog
was gonna
survived episode 1.
Thank
so that's
God.
good. Yes.
Thank God, because I was up all night worrying about it. I also wanted to ask you about Steve Buscemi and the casting of him, because ever since The Sopranos, there was this sense that, your leading man, didn't have to be likable. And this was kind of a new twist, that he had, Jim Gandolfini had a likable side, but for the most part, he was really disgusting.
Sure.
And even showing up on screen not looking good, and hair up in the morning, and getting the newspaper in his bathrobe and belly and whatnot. And then you saw other shows start to cast somewhat dislikable leads, and something that I guess still is more prevalent on cable. But I wonder with Steve, I mean, it wasn't just that he is dislikable on a major scale, or has a really bad side, shall we say? Right. It's a slight bad side, and the womanizing and so forth and so on. But he's basically kind of strange looking for a typical leading man in a series. Right. And while I would expect HBO to go out on a limb because they were coming off of The Sopranos and they do things a little bit differently, I still was surprised about that choice, and I wondered what it was in Steve that made you think he could be a romantic leading guy. I mean, somebody would say that's sexy, or he's sexy. What is it that you saw? You told me that you'd seen him in
specifically, I've seen everything Steve's ever done. I remember the first time I ever saw him was in a movie called In the Soup. And there was a scene where he was trying to teach himself how to do the cha-cha with feet on the floor with Seymour Cassell. And I thought the guy was hilarious. And then I just started to pay attention, and he popped up in Barton Fink. And I was like, oh, that's that guy again. And then I learned his name, and then followed everything, and saw Parting Glances, an early film of his. And he's just great. And so I've seen everything he's done. The thing that made me convinced he could be a romantic lead was his performance in Ghost World. We played a very sort of a quiet, kind of nerdy guy, sort of a little based on Art Crumb, I think, the artist. And there were moments in that movie I went, oh my God, Steve can do this. So when it came time to cast Boardwalk Empire, Martin Scorsese and I were talking about, just, okay, what are we going to do here? Nobody really knew what the real Nucky looked like, so it didn't really matter that we tried to replicate that.
Yeah, I get that.
So Marty said, all right, well, what do you think?
TV.
Yeah, he said, well, let's just cast the best actor. Forget about what he looks like. And I said, well, Steve Buscemi. And Marty said, that's a great idea. And we continued batting names around for a week. And he called me up one day and he said, I can't stop thinking about Buscemi. And I said, I can't either. He said, let's do it. And we called HBO, and they said, wow, that's really, really interesting. And we said,
interesting, good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we said, are you good to go? And we said, yeah. It was so much so, I guess, outside the box that when I called Steve, and Steve knew he was in contention, I called him up and he said, you have the role. And he said, well, that's really great. I'm so really flattered that you're considering me. I said, no, I'm offering you the role. And he still couldn't get his head around it because, again, he was told his whole career, I think you're a character actor, you're a supporting actor. And for me,
you got crazy eyes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but for me though, it's like whenever I would see a movie coming out, Steve Buscemi's in it, I would say the movie might suck, but I know that part's going to be good.
Okay. So
and then I said, okay, if I know he's good, then make him the star, and then the whole thing will be good. So simplistic as that sounds.
No, but it's interesting. You even have other characters, even in the premiere episode this year, who mention that he's not good looking.
Yeah.
Or they make jokes about it,
Right,
like skinny
right.
pay, you know.
Sure. Well, we've done that. I mean, that's, over the years on Sopranos. I mean, and again, that's just the reality of the world is people talk about each other, they make fun of each other, they pick out whatever your physical, ethnic, whatever flaw is and zero in on that. So it would be disingenuous not to have Gyp Rossetti, who's a guy who exactly would go for that,
Right,
to not pick out whatever characteristics he wants to
But it's not
make
like
fun
he's
of.
masquerading as like gorgeous leading man.
No,
I mean, and
no.
not even because even though he
Yeah,
like,
Nucky has
hangs
made
with the
jokes
bad
about
crowd. Yeah.
Nucky's made jokes about himself,
Right.
So I mean, yeah, it's a fair game.
But it's a weird thing because you still can't take your eyes off of him when
Yeah,
he's on the screen.
absolutely.
So it's just a really interesting choice. But I wondered what the network. I mean, since it's HBO, I get. But had you been on network, there's no way. Do you think that
It would have been a major battle, and,
Yeah.
and man, I might have lost it. But HBO, again, to their credit, they got it. And I knew, by the end of episode 5, when Nucky and Margaret first get together, I said, I know when people see that, I know we're going to have them and people are going to buy it. And I think that was a pivotal moment for Nucky as a leading man, and certainly as a romantic leading man.
Well, let's talk about Margaret and the introduction. I mean, one of the big themes of the premiere episode was the aviatrix and the
Right.
feminism. And I wonder, since we're starting, and now we're at 1923, if this is going to be a big theme throughout this season, looking at, because you wouldn't think, I mean, this is a woman who was abused. I mean, you don't think that
Sure.
she's going to be somebody who's speaking out about health issues for women, even to her husband or to a
Right.
doctor. It was
Sure.
just like it was kind of a interesting thing to see. So I'm just wondering, do you think that this season is going to be, I mean, is this season going to focus on that theme, and in what way is she going to be the character that carries that into the episodes?
Sure. Well, Margaret really comes into her own this season. It really is a period of great self-discovery, great movement forward. Just going back though to who this woman was, it is true she was an abused woman. She
Right.
was poor. The idea that she even showed up in Nucky's office looking for money and looking for help says a lot about who she is. She does take things into her own hands. She was smart enough to get herself in that office and knew that this was the most powerful guy in town. There is a manipulative side to Margaret. Early on, she stole some lingerie from the place she worked so she could wear it, knowing that she may hook up with Nucky. This is somebody who's very calculating and shrewd. She's not particularly educated, but she's self-educated and very smart. So her development over the season sort of tracks pretty well. She's now in a position where she's the wife of the most powerful man in town. She's very wealthy, but she's essentially a kept woman, and she's got no real purpose. She's sort of adrift when we see her in the beginning of third season, and she hears about this woman, Carrie Duncan, who really represents a new breed of woman who is quite literally soaring off into the unknown on this, embarking on this adventure. And I think it really, more than anything, represents hope. Not that she exactly wants to go out and do that, but I just questioning, what am I doing with my life, and how can I make a difference and do something that actually is fulfilling?
But are you going to look at the women's struggle for the vote, and and birth control, and I mean these are the issues from the 1920s.
Sure.
I mean, you're basically, when you said that from this, I feel like I came in the middle of something. I mean, we haven't really seen a show that deals with that.
Right.
You've seen it in, sort of in a romantic, sort of as a side issue.
Right.
But if this is the time, I mean, it's one of the major issues of that entire decade.
Well, women's reproductive rights
Right.
certainly is a theme we're going to explore this year. And I mean, again, you have to
We're not
remember.
giving anything away, but I'm just
it's
wondering
yeah.
if does that really come into play?
Yes.
Is that something
yeah,
that you
that
wanna...
is Margaret's storyline for this year involves that very much so. And that's an issue that's been near and dear to her heart from the beginning. Of course, she experimented with birth control, her own Lysol, these horrific attempts at birth control. Because again, and this is what's amazing too about the show in general. I mean, the more the further away from the 1920s we get, the closer we are to it. So many similarities. Birth control, it was illegal to possess a birth control device in the 1920s. I mean, certainly forget about the abortion issue. The birth control issue was huge. The fact that people are still debating evolution. The Monkey Scopes trial was 1924. I mean, that was an issue then. 9 years, still there. The idea that prohibition is sort of a template for the illegal drug business. I mean, these are the almost identical issues. Corruption in the White House. We've been there too in the last 10 years. I mean, it's in a way it's almost uncanny how many parallels there are between that decade and this one, and certainly we have a chance to explore that.
I mean, I think it's interesting. Do you find it crazy when you're looking at the election and you see some of these same issues coming up, certainly on the Republican side, about about the abortion issue, which also involves women's health care?
Sure.
And while we're thank God, a little bit further along here. I mean,
Right.
they are some of the same debates. It must be like kind of weird to be looking at it and probably checking history and taking a look at how that debate went down. Is there? It seems awfully similar. When I was watching, I'm like,
it's extremely similar.
Makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, extremely disheartening. You think, God, we've made almost no progress in certain areas. In some ways, I mean, this is very cynical. I mean, with a corruption issue in the White House, during the last presidential administration, I thought, my God, how bad could it possibly be? How did we get this bad? And then I read about the Harding administration, and I thought, okay, I guess I took some comfort there. It's just always been this way. Like, okay, I guess this is just business as usual. So I mean, that's not really the conclusion you want to draw from that. But I thought, okay, I guess it's not. Even journalism, the whole idea that you look at what's on Fox and this stuff, and then I realized, wow, you look at the newspapers, of the Hearst era, and it's the same thing.
Well, you have a really rampant. I mean, the Lithuania. I mean, you're going to have like rampant yellow journalism, in that
actually,
period.
Hearst. The reality was William Randolph Hearst actually had a vendetta against the real Nucky. Nucky had said something about his girlfriend and
Marion Davies.
Marion Davies, yeah, something unflattering, and Hearst then just absolutely targeted Nucky, and basically it was a smear campaign. Not really. Not smearing him, but nothing Hearst was reporting wasn't true, but basically made it his personal goal to get Nucky unseated and put in jail. Why isn't this man in jail? But it was all based on what he said about Marion Davies.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the yellow journalism, and it really is like everything old is new again, because all that tabloid journalism is very similar, except for it's concentrated in the 20s. And like you said, there's so fewer outlets. I mean, only a couple of papers that now it's like this just almost a wash of yellow journalism.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at it. I mean, so it's so. I mean, I wonder when you come out, when people are talking and writing about your show. I mean, do you try to have any kind of relationship with your audience, or to talk to them on all these different sites and all these different ways that there is to have access to somebody who's creating, or is that too familiar? Does that ruin, you think, that mystery that should go with it?
A little bit. I mean, well, this is a good example. I do things like this. Journalists I respect, and sites I admire, things like that. I've done interviews for.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's all these I want to talk to people writing and people trying to almost insert themselves because everybody wants to be involved in everything.
Right.
And I just wonder, when you're running a really successful show, how do you handle that many people trying to be a part of it, and is it right for? I mean, is it good for the show?
You have to be selective.
Yeah.
I don't think it is. Again, I mean, I think there needs to be a certain amount of mystery of how we do this. I mean, it's sort of. Letting people into the creative process is something I'm not interested in doing.
Right.
I try not to pay attention to, the audience likes this character, so let's add more of that character. I just really try to write the show as I see it.
I mean,
that's a function of network TV. In a network show where they do 22 episodes, by episode 4, you're on the air and you're still writing the back half of the season. And you go, oh, they hate this character or they like that character. So that'll be the tail that'll wag the dog for the rest of the season, and sometimes the rest of the show forever, what an audience wants or doesn't want. And of course, look, it's a business and you want people to watch your show. But for me as a creative person, I really would just try to present the show as I see it, hope people like it, and let the chips fall where they may.
I think it's better. And this leads me to my next question, which is one of the things I find most interesting about being a show creator and running a show. Whether or not that your show could be successful if you allow a plethora of different voices into the show. It seems to me that whenever a show is successful, there's kind of a despot at the top who, maybe a benevolent despot, but certainly a despot who has the voice, tells you the way it's supposed to sound, the way it's supposed to look, and that also is more difficult to create in network television, although we've had some like Aaron Sorkin, who just controls everybody and takes away their acceptance speeches. But I'm telling my audience I'm referring to a very famous Emmy Awards where Aaron did not let the other writers speak, although he had an explanation for it, to be fair, but not a very convincing one, to not be fair. But anyway, do you think that for your show to be effective, that it has to be mostly your voice? Do you run it where you have input into every script? Because that's certainly seems to me, it's been my experience when I interview people who
Right.
really run a show that is as well known as yours, that
Right.
that's the way it is. So do you think that's the reason some of the shows are so bad, because there's too many different people involved? Or, I mean, what do you think? Does it need that to be successful?
I think it helps. I think it helps to have one singular vision and say, this is what the show is, this is what the show is not. I have a very strong writing partner in Howard Corder, who's also an exec producer on the show. When I say writing partner, I don't mean that we write together, but he is in the room with me, and he understands
exactly. Is he
exactly.
running it with you?
Yeah, well, not really. I mean, he's not the showrunner, but I mean, I respect his choices and his decisions to the point where, I mean, Howard will write a script and we'll shoot it. I mean,
you hired him.
I hired Howard very early on. I had been an admirer of his work. He's a very well-known playwright, and he had written a few scripts that I really liked. So Howard completely understands my vision. And but again, everything ultimately gets channeled through me. But I've got incredible department heads that I know what I don't know. I know what I'd like to see, but I have for example, our costume department. We've got John Dunn, incredible costume designer. I mean, I'll defer to his judgment. Our hairstyle, or certainly the look of the show. Tim Van Patten, our production designer. Ultimately, it's my call at the end, but I've got such faith in the people who work on the show that for the most part, I sort of get out of the way and let them do their job, and then I'll make the final decision. But again, I'll never know the
But
extent.
he'll write a script. I mean, somebody on your show will write a script and you don't rewrite it?
Oh no, Howard is the only exception.
Okay.
Yeah, Howard is.
That's what I'm asking.
No,
That's
everything gets funneled through me and/or Howard together.
And when you look, I mean, because when I look at the other shows, it just seems that while that's not probably the most fun a writer will have working for one of you guys, it seems to show a certain consistency in the show. I mean, the language sounds the same, the rhythms sound the same, and I've understood from different showrunners, and certainly even from Matt, when we've talked about it, but I've talked to a lot of showrunners over the years, and it's very difficult to find somebody, to find somebody, when you do find a writer, but you want them to have the same rhythms, you want them to do it your way.
It's very difficult, it's very difficult to replicate that, but that's the job of a TV writer. A lot of it is mimicry. It's a lot of look at the show, look at the tone, look at the pacing, listen to how people speak to each other. These are the types of stories we tell, these are the types of stories we don't tell, and then try to replicate that. And
have you fired a lot of writers on your show?
Not fired, but moved
on.
on.
I'm sorry, I should use the showrunner word.
There's been a fair amount of turnover.
And isn't that rather typical?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, because I think people, and I'm just sort of saying that to my audience, it's something that they make sort of a tabloid headline out of in the television industry, that somebody, and they certainly, if it's a woman showrunner and she's firing or having writers move on, like she's a massive bitch, but they even do that.
Well, worse the other way. If you let a woman go, it looks like you're somehow anti-woman, and it's just we need writers who can write the show. If a Martian came down tomorrow and knew how to write Boardwalk Empire, that Martian would be hopefully working on my show.
But don't you also refresh it anyway? I mean, isn't it almost built into the system that people will move on and you will get new people doing it, or do you going to keep the same people the whole time? I thought even David Chase. You had teams. You had some people move on. You and Matt you were there a long time, but that was the exception.
Yeah, I mean, you can get burnt out. I mean, Sopranos, we did I think 83 hours. That's 40 some odd feature films if you look at it that way. That's a lot of writing, and it can really start to burn you out. The flip side of that is, as a TV writer, the idea is it's so wonderful to get on a show that has legs, that you can sort of really dig deep into these characters and stay on it for a long time. Not to mention, it's not so bad being employed steadily for several years. So it really depends. I mean, if I found people that I thought really delivered the show consistently, I would do everything I could to hold on to them.
Okay, but in the system of the way your system works, generally people will move on, and I just want people, that's not a particularly interesting headline.
No,
that you do, and we see it a lot.
All the time.
I always am like,
all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
This is a chance for somebody to talk to an expert. This is what the show's about, and to understand that when they see certain stories, like what they should be paying attention to, and what really doesn't matter, and whether it really is a story.
Right.
And if they're liking TV, and most of my viewers do, and that's why we wanted you to come here. I want them to understand how it works, and how not to get into the creative process, but just sort of some of the decisions, get a little tiny taste of why you made some of the decisions that you that you did make. And let me just ask you, this is my last question because we're running out of time, but do you worry about how when the show comes on the air? This seems to be, I felt when The Sopranos was delayed for a number of different reasons, whether David Chase wanted to make it because there were contract disputes, whatever the reason is, or because they want to put something in your time slot and try to get another show show started for,
Right.
when yours ends,
Right.
whatever their business reason is. Do you have something this time around that your show's going to come on every year and not like leave the audience for a year and a half waiting to see
Right.
what happens? Is that, where do you think that comes into holding on to your audience and building a show?
I think the audience will come back to your show if they like it whenever it's on. That said, I mean, there's something comforting for me as a viewer to say, oh, in September, Boardwalk Empire comes back on, or in the summertime, this show comes back on. So, as it happens, September is our time slot. I mean, that's when we're on, and I consistently will try to get the show on the air every year in September. That requires a tremendous amount of work. It takes a long time to shoot our shows. The other thing people don't realize sometimes, talking about a network show is 43 minutes. An hour of Boardwalk Empire is very often an hour, and that's another 4 days of shooting, and that's 15 or 16 more script pages that need to be written and filmed, and costume design and production design. So it takes us a long time to deliver these episodes. So 12 episodes of this takes almost the entire year. We have to prep for a few months to write, start shooting, and there's not a lot of break.
All of your
Brooklyn.
Is it just in Brooklyn?
Yeah, for the most part.
And even your Chicago ones.
Brooklyn, yeah. Chicago is now in Bed-Stuy.
I don't want to ruin it for everybody,
Yeah.
but it's Brooklyn with a lot of wind.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just windier and better pizza.
But so, if they pushed your show, would you be pissed off? I mean, do you think it would hurt, or you think people would come back?
I think people would come back, but
would you be pissed off?
I wouldn't be pissed off, but I would put up a little bit of a fight. I think I'd
be
really
pissed
like
off
to
for
keep
you.
it. Yeah, thank
How's
you.
that?
I'll let Matt be pissed off. He seems to be good at that.
I thought when they moved The Sopranos that it was detrimental, and I think I mean, yes, a lot of people came back, some people
Right.
didn't,
Yeah.
and that people were annoyed. It's sort of they take it out on the people that are writing it and
Right.
on the show because
Right.
they don't realize that decision is not being made by the writer or the showrunner.
Yeah, true.
So,
Sure.
and then I had to have one last question
Okay.
since you're here
Great.
about the details on the show, and much has
Sure.
been made about the details on Mad Men and how
Yes.
Matt is like an obsessive compulsive about
Yes.
every single thing, and
Yes.
Boardwalk Empire also seems to be very true. Is that
Yes.
to its period? Fabulous clothing. I
Yes,
like the
thank you.
clothing. Very
Yes.
flattering. Wish we could go back to.
Yeah, exactly.
And great hairstyles,
Yep.
and even the jewelry that she was wearing.
Yeah.
So, are you? Is there somebody who's your obsessive compulsive person, or is that you?
There is. Well, there's me,
Or
but I
both.
have somebody else who's even more obsessive named Ed McGinty. He's one of the first people I hired on the show. Ed is a fourth-generation Atlantic City native whose grandfather worked as a bellman at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel when the real Nucky lived there.
Oh.
Knows the city code. It really just keeps us honest, not just about Atlantic City, but about everything. Every colloquialism, hairstyles, how much things cost, just down to the most.
Are you getting like an
minutia.
expert on that? I mean, have you
Oh,
become
yeah.
an expert on the period?
Yeah,
Or you
I wouldn't
like
say
them to-
an expert, but I know certainly a lot more than the average person. But we really take great pains. The proudest moment for me in terms of being a nitpicker was we had an episode where Nucky's brother Eli takes a course in public speaking and takes a Dale Carnegie course. Dale Carnegie's real name is spelled Gey.
Oh.
He changed it a couple of years into his career to GIE because people were confusing him with Andrew Carnegie, the industrialist.
Right.
So he thought it would be beneficial. People thought he was related to this multimillionaire. So at the time when Eli was taking the Dale Carnegie course, it was still spelled Gey, and he showed Nucky a pamphlet and it said Dale Carnegie. People called me out on that saying, oh, that's wrong, but actually in 1920, that's the way Dale Carnegie spelled his name. And I said, you know what, I'm going for accuracy and I don't care if people think we're wrong, I know we're right.
So people are watching.
Oh, yeah.
To be sure that everything's
Yeah,
perfect.
they're trying to bust you, and they'll find little things here and there, but we
Well,
try
and that
to-
wasn't something that you learned on The Sopranos, like that. It was. I mean, that didn't. David. I mean, because the mob. I mean.
Yeah, it wasn't not so much,
not
but it's just
important.
it is to me when I see a movie. Things
It is?
take me out. Yeah, the Godfather 3, one of the opening shots, it says New York City, 1979, I believe, or 70 something, and there is the World Financial Center in the shot, which was not built until after that. And right out of the gate, I went, this is taking me out of the movie. That's not. Why couldn't you get a stock shot from the 70s? Why? That's not New York City, 1979, or whatever you're telling me it is. And that stuff drives me crazy, and I'm assuming it drives Matt crazy too.
Well, I just wonder because when I was watching this, and it's. I mean, it is so it is that same, it's the feel, and that seems to have become, I mean, that's a big part, but now I understand why you think it's, because it's story, like it's part of your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I just sort of think it's part of just being crazy.
Maybe
writer.
a little of
Yeah.
both, but we're creating a world. I'm trying to sell you an illusion. This is real, and if you see something that takes you out of that, or you hear music, and of course the big paradox, or if that's the right word, our opening credit song is from the Bryan Jonestown Massacre, which is completely incongruous to the era, but for me, that was by design as well. I mean, trying to get the idea that this is a modern look at the 1920s. This is a look at the 1920s that you haven't seen before. So it would have felt very typical.
Is that the whole thing? Like when you pick a world like that you have to make sure that it's not going to, you're going to pick a world that you're creating. You're saying, we haven't seen this on the air, and we haven't seen it on television. It was the first thing you thought about it.
Sure.
Because I thought, okay, it's another gangster world when I first heard about it.
Right.
I figured it would get that it would be really well written because you were writing it. When you first told me about it, I mean, when everybody first started talking about it, but I wondered, did you like purposely say, I'm going to put a twist on this, just like David put a twist on The Sopranos, and I don't mean just like that you said that, but something that made it, that's a gangster world, but this isn't a Goodfellas movie. This is a movie more about family. I mean, this is a TV show
bit,
more.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you do that with everything you write. You know, you try to find a different way into it. I mean, I think, you know, and you know,
were you concerned about it? Like, and said, I'm not going to do it the way I want him to be. He's somewhat more intellectual. I mean, this is not your main
a little
character.
bit. Yeah, I mean,
He's
that was what attracted me to him as a protagonist. I mean, this guy was half politician and half sort of, you know, low-level, corrupt gangster. His gangsterism was more in the election rigging variety and the leg breaking and extortion variety. That guy starts to cross the line into a different world when Prohibition is enacted. So that was interesting to me too. That this is a guy who has ties to the White House. So that was a guy you hadn't seen before. But you know, the gangster genre it's sort of like doing a Western. It's like, you know, you're going to see cowboys. You know, you're going to see horses. These are things you're going to see. You're going to see guys in suits, and there's going to be some Italian guys and some guns, and it's a gangster show.
We're going to throw some Jewish guys in.
Yeah, we'll throw them in, and you know, it'll mix it up a little bit. But yeah, it's you know, those are just certain conventions of the genre.
But the writing thing is, but my world is going to have this happen.
Right.
And frankly, to me, Nucky is like he's very modern. I mean, he's uncomfortably modern.
Right. Well,
did you find that?
Yeah. Well, that's what's great about the 20s too. I mean, even though it's 90 years ago, it's very accessible. If you watch a show that was set in 1910, it would look like a completely different world. 1923, people wore suits. You know, women wore short dresses. They went to the movies. They spoke on the telephone. They went to dinner at restaurants. They flew in planes. It's very recognizable. It feels familiar. So it's really fun. I mean, even though it's an old world, you can hold the mirror up to today's society and just really relate to these people. So it's
all right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. This was great.
I just want to tell my audience that producer Nick will be back next week. He is a little bit on hiatus right now, but you can follow me at A Hope Weiner. You can check my Facebook page. I'll send Media Mayhem with Allison Hope Weiner, and I actually do read it and respond. So, like, try to not criticize my outfits. And you should watch. You can watch Terry on Sunday at the Emmys, and we'll see how Boardwalk Empire does. But it doesn't really even matter because it's a really good show.
An honor to be nominated.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean,
it really is.
Alcohol.
That is there's that too. There's both.
Is it rough when you lose? Do you find it? I mean, I only have one perspective on this, and it's rough.
It's a long night when you're sitting there, you know. I mean, there were many years on The Sopranos when we had to sit there, you know, listening to the West Wing theme song over and over again. It wasn't particularly pleasant, but the truth is, it really is, as cliched as it sounds, it's thrilling. You're at the Emmy Awards. I mean, how bad could it be?
Do you think there's a bias against New York shows because you're coming to a hometown?
I've so long since stopped trying to figure this out. It's a mystery why certain things get nominated, certain things don't, certain episodes, certain writers, actors, directors. It's all over the place. It's very schizophrenic. I mean, I think the way the TV Academy is broken down into different peer groups, the nominations sometimes don't seem to make sense because there's not a lot of consistency.
They sometimes.
I mean, certain something will get nominated for Best Show, but then won't have the other nominations to back that up.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
It's like movies with the director and everybody else. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, anyway, so thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And be sure, everybody, to watch Boardwalk Empire. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting, but it also looks fantastic. It is lush. I wanted to jump in.
Yeah,
today
I wouldn't mind spending a week in that world.
Especially with the treasure chest.
Yes.
All right, well, thanks so much, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.